All right. Well, welcome everyone to this beautiful Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining us. I am recording this workshop so that we can share it with you or others who couldn't attend this morning. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a couple PowerPoint slides. Monarch butterfly is our winner, by the way. It's like multiple responses for that. Okay. Well, I'm Kristen Morose. I'm one of the co-directors of the Minnesota Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations programs. And for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are a challenge assistance and recognition program for Minnesota cities and tribal nations working on their sustainability and quality of life goals and actions across the state. And so we're excited to host these monthly webinar series on specific topics to help further the assistance and identify some resources and some peer connections on these specific topics. And we like to start off our workshops with some random networking. Since we can't do things in person right now, we want you to be able to introduce yourselves, maybe meet a new face, say hello to an old one, and get to know some new people. So I'm going to put you into random breakout rooms here in a minute. Go ahead and introduce yourself with the group of people that you're with. And then if you wanted to share an example of a pollinator protection practice that maybe you have implemented in your community, if you are a city or a tribal nation folk, or at your own home or in some other maybe volunteer experience that you have had opportunity to do so with. So give me 1 second here to get some rooms made. And let me see. I'm excited to go ahead and kick off our agenda here. So we'll have Rebeca Gutierez-Moreno joining us as the State Pollinator Coordinator with the Environmental Quality Board. And Rebeca is going to give us a little bit of an overview to start things off. And then we will move on through our presentations as we go along. If you have questions or comments for our presenters at any time, feel free to raise your hand on the little icon on the top, or put anything into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well, and we'll have plenty of question and answer time. So Rebeca, I think you're going to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. Let me just, I always, when I share, I have 2 screens, so I always need to make sure I know which one is the one that will have the slides. So, okay, I think I know.
And then a reminder to anyone else to just go ahead and mute yourselves, unless you are intending to talk, of course.
Okay. And present. Let
Perfect.
me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Can you see it? Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. So as Kristen said, my name is Rebeca Gutierez-Moreno, and I am the State Pollinator Coordinator with the Environmental Quality Board. I'm really happy to be here and talking to you about pollinator protection in Minnesota. So what is the state doing? Just really short background, I think most of the people here know what are the causes for pollinator decline. We understand this is a very, it's a complicated issue because there are different factors that are affecting pollinators, such as the loss of fragmentation of their natural habitat, diseases and parasites, pesticides, and climate change. So what is Minnesota doing? So since 2016, the governor then published signed an executive order to establish a framework for pollinator protection in the state. Then in 2019, the current governor, it was an updated executive order, and that gives guidance and a framework for state agencies to work on our desired outcome, which is that we would have diverse and thriving pollinator populations in Minnesota. And then for that, we have 3 goals, and I will talk about those in a bit. Also, it is important to mention that this executive orders directed the Environmental Quality Board to convene the interagency pollinator protection team. So the IPPT, as in short, is in charge of putting out every year a pollinator annual report on the interagency efforts to protect pollinators in the state. Also, during 2016 and 2018, there was a Governor's Committee for Pollinator Protection who came up with recommendations or developed, sorry, recommendations for pollinator protections in Minnesota. And you can find both the recommendations and the reports in the EQB website, the Environmental Quality Board website. So these are the state agencies that are part of the interagency pollinator protection team. Just real quick, is Bowser, Department of Corrections, Minnesota Zoo, Department of Health, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Administration, Department of Agriculture, Pollution Control Agency, Department of Education, and the Department of Transportation. And also, I want to mention these are just a few of other organizations, institutions, nonprofits that are doing great work on pollinator protection in the state. So I just wanted to give a little shout out. So as I mentioned, we have statewide goals for pollinator protection. First is habitat. That lands throughout Minnesota will support diverse pollinator populations, the judicious use of pesticides, so that pesticides will be used only when necessary, and promoting an integrated pest management framework. And then also public engagement, that Minnesotans will be aware and will understand and value pollinators in the state. And just, a little bit of what progress has been done, about the outcome, which are healthy, diverse pollinators. We have metrics, we have scorecards. So again, you can check our report. I'm not going to give a whole presentation on the report, but there is a large knowledge gap about the diversity of pollinators in Minnesota. However, the DNR and some funds that have been funding the Minnesota Bee Atlas and other, surveys. Here we have Elaine Evans from the Bee Lab that has been doing also surveys to understand, bumblebee populations across the Twin Cities and other regions. So those efforts are starting to, to fill that gap. However, we know that there's still a lot of things that are not known. On good news, the Minnesota Zoo has the only breeding program of an endangered butterfly, which is the Dakota skipper butterfly, and it has reported initial success in their reintroduction in Minnesota. For goal 1, which is the land support pollinators, there continues to be a steady increase in the number of species of seeds used in restoration acres, although the amount of restoration acres has remained, it continues to increase steadily, but not in a, not in a huge proportion. However, the diversity of the seeds that are introduced in those areas has been increasing and getting better. DNR and Bowser continue to partner with federal agencies and conservation non-governmental organizations to continue to improve conditions for pollinators. I'm sure you all also have heard of Bowser's initiative of the Lawns to Legumes program. That is also a great effort to introduce habitat in more urban spaces as well. MnDOT also has participated in restorations of roadsides aimed to increase native vegetation of pollinators on state highways and highway rights of way. Regarding the judicious use of pesticides, state agencies are promoting and implementing integrated pest management to protect pollinators in public lands. The staff, myself and staff from Minnesota Department of Agriculture participate in a national level managed pollinator protection working group that works toward developing materials and awareness about protecting managed bees from the effects of pesticides. Also, the Department of Agriculture continues collaborating with the University of Minnesota to promote IPM and to develop IPM alternatives. Regarding goal 3, that Minnesotans will understand, value, and actively support pollinators. There have been, during the past year-ish, agencies and organizations have been able to adapt to online education and outreach. And, for example, this workshop is a great example of, adapting to a new reality with COVID that we hope, will end soon. However, it has brought also great advantages. For example, now we can access this and participate from far away. Also, Minnesota had the first habitat-friendly solar summit in February 2020. There has been, EQB and IPPT and Elaine Evans collaborated to produce a pollinator-themed lottery ticket with the Minnesota Lottery, which is right now, out there. So if you want to check out how it looks, it has the bumblebee, the Rusty Patch bumblebee, and has a bee-informed box where you can scratch and see, good information about how to help bumblebees and pollinators in general. There's also pollinator-themed critical habitat license plates, and recently this year, the IPPT put forward a pollinator survey to understand how the annual report that we produce is being used and what needs to be updated for this year. So we still have lots of challenges, of course. There's still limited knowledge of the hundreds, if not thousands, of pollinator species that call Minnesota home. There's still, a cost associated with installation and maintenance of habitat that is friendly to pollinators and other wildlife. Also, the integrated pest management approach is complex, and right now we are looking into ways of evaluating how it is implemented and adopted. There's also the great need of balancing the needs of wild and managed pollinator populations. And also, there's misinformation about pollinators and how to help them. What can cities do? It takes all of us. We think that cities have a great opportunity to increase and promote pollinator habitat with Minnesota native plants. Use an IPM framework when managing pests in public spaces with pollinator protection in mind, and also participate in sustainable community commitments. There are examples with Pollinate Minnesota, such as pollinator resolutions, and with Cersei Society, such as pollinator pledges. So we want to encourage cities to participate in this community commitments. So that's in short. I hope I was able to explain it, and thank you. Here is my contact information, so feel free to contact me with any questions and comments that you may have.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And we'll also share slides and contact information with you all after later this week as well. And it looks like Danielle said she has used the Be Lucky lottery tickets in the past. She wasn't lucky though, but she liked it.
Thank you. Yeah, I got like 20 for myself and I got $2. I've been buying it from my friends. So yeah, I think it's a great awareness tool. I hope more people are, learning about that we have a state bee, the Rusty Patch bumblebee, and different factoids about that.
Awesome. We're gonna invite Dan Shaw from the Board of Water and Soil Resources to present. Dan, are you okay presenting your slides?
Yes.
All right, and it looks like Beth had a question I'm hoping you'll answer on a little bit of an update on Lawns to Legumes program and what we can look forward to this year, next year, etc.
Okay, sounds
and
good.
Particularly if it would be usable on public land.
Okay, great. Yeah, we have an expansion into public land, so I'll talk more about that. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll be talking about pollinator partnerships and restoration efforts in the state and some of the resources that are being developed. The Board of Water and Soil Resources, our mission is to improve and protect Minnesota's water and soil resources by working in partnerships with local organizations and private landowners. Pollinators do play a really important role with our programs. Essentially they're sustaining our native ecosystems, and that plays a really important role with soil and water conservation as well. So it is a really important part of our efforts. With our work, and I think it's true with many other partners, we're really trying to work pollinator habitat into as many programs and landscape types as possible within Minnesota. And I'll talk more about some of these examples of different project types. And so where we have gaps, we're looking for funding sources, trying to fill those gaps. Conservation lands and natural areas, is maybe a good example. We have some programs like our RIM program, but we've been pursuing additional funding for some of those types of landscapes. We have our RIM program, Reinvest in Minnesota, which is focused on conservation easements, wetland programs, cost share programs, habitat-friendly solar. I'll talk more about lawns and legumes. We're working on different resources. We have many different state seed mixes. There's about 70 of them right now. We're adding more, and we're working to make sure that they have the appropriate focus on pollinators for all of those resources. And then we've been working on some pollinator mapping as well, and I can talk about that if there's questions on that topic. We developed a pollinator plan, I think it was back in 2016, and we're using that to help guide the efforts of our agency. So we've been updating that plan about every 2 years. We also have a What's Working webpage, which has information from practitioners about what's been successful for their projects. And there's a pollinator toolbox that we've been updating about every year with new information, and that's intended to guide projects from early stages looking at funding all the way through doing long-term management on projects. We have around 300,000 acres of conservation easements in the state. Many of these conservation easements are focused on landscapes that are informed by plans like the Minnesota Prairie Conservation Plan. And it's pretty common that we're working with other partners on these efforts as well. The graphic on the left shows a corridor that's being restored and has Fish and Wildlife Service funding, NRCS funding, DNR funding, and Bowser funding all combined together to help create these corridors, which are really important for pollinator habitat. The larger areas of habitat we can create, the more resilient these landscapes are for pollinators. And so this is a really important approach as far as our efforts with these larger conservation lands, but this also applies within urban areas. We also try to connect these types of landscapes and have these corridors within urban areas. Our Minnesota Habitat Friendly Solar Program is a few years old, and it's been great to see the excitement around this focus with solar. We have around 50 projects that are on our list that are meeting state standards. And we're encouraging even municipalities that are doing solar projects to work towards meeting the standard. It's not a really involved process. There's a couple of forms to fill out. So we're encouraging more partners to be thinking about working with this program and adding their projects to the list. And I can answer more questions about this program if anybody has any. Our Lawns and Legumes program started in 2019, and it's had a lot of momentum, which has been great to see, a lot of excitement with the public. And we're moving into phase 2 with this program. We were in a pilot phase with the first round of funding for this program. And now we're recommended for additional funding through the LCCMR, about $900,000. So we're anxiously awaiting the end of the legislative session to see the results and see if we're funded for this next round. The funding came through the LCCMR for the first round, and this program is really focused on establishing residential pollinator habitat across Minnesota. There's a focus on the rusty patch bumblebee, which is Minnesota's new state bee, but also other at-risk pollinators is a focus of the program. We have many partners that are involved in this effort. Really, to be successful for a program like this, where we're working to hopefully change practices within the state about how people address residential landscapes and other urban landscapes. It really takes a large number of partners involved to help with communication, collaborate on the program itself. We have many great partners that are on our advisory team for this program. And then individual cities, counties, tribes, watershed districts, conservation districts, and neighborhoods all play important roles working with residents. To be successful, another part of this program we think is really important is just the connection of people within neighborhoods working with residents, and then residents sharing information with other people within their neighborhoods. So we really encourage people to be sharing the resources through this program. The logo can be shared with partners if they want to use this program in different ways. So if a city wants to start using the Lawns and Legumes program and the resources, you're definitely welcome to do that. And there's 3 components to this program. We have a public education and outreach campaign. We have many partners involved with that. The key goal is just to increase the amount of information that's being shared for this program and the awareness of the program. With the funding, we have 2 different types of grants. We have individual support grants. That's where there's $350 that's available for residents to apply for. In addition to coaching and workshops, we have over 100 coaches that are assisting with this program in different ways, which is great to see their involvement working with the residents. We had over 7,500 applications submitted in the first round of these individual support grants. And then we have demonstration neighborhoods, which focus on key habitat corridors within the state. These were grants of between $20,000 and $40,000, and we have 12 active groups in the state. With this second round of funding, we are applying for funding for individual support and demonstration neighborhoods. And one change or expansion with the demonstration neighborhoods is that we want to expand into community spaces and schools with that funding. So there would be combinations of potentially public parks and residential landscapes that could be part of these demonstration neighborhoods. We've also developed several resources for the Lawns and Legumes program. One is our Planting for Pollinators guide. This has been a really popular guide. The PDF is up on our website. Residents have really been interested in planting templates as well to help them understand where to start with their plantings. So we have a few planting templates. We're interested in adding more of these over time. We've been talking about creating some that have more cultural significance. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to expand these planting templates and just have more options for residents working on projects. Really, if you go to our Lawns and Legumes website, you'll see a lot of different resources. There's been resources from different partners pulled together on that website. So topics like converting lawn over to pollinator lawn, how to start a pollinator planting, plant selection. There's just a lot of different resources and types of information that are up on that website. With the program, we've been focused on 4 different practice types. One is native pocket plantings, which can include rain gardens, boulevard plantings, lakeshore buffers. And then a second is beneficial trees and shrubs. A third is pollinator habitats, and then pollinator meadows. And having these different types has been important for the program because it's given different options for residents in the state. And then if there's more restrictive ordinances within a certain city, some of these options can work better than others. And that's another way that it's been helpful to have these different project types available for landowners. I wanted to point out that we do have a Lawns and Legumes partner webpage. And so this is intended for cities and counties and watershed districts and others who are interested in working with the program. There's a partner toolkit that has information about how partners can work with the program. There's a sample landscape permit, sample pollinator friendly ordinances, information about sharing the logo, and a few other things on this web page. Probably the best way to get to this web page is just do a web search for Lawns of Legumes partner resources. But we do plan on continuing to add more information onto this page to continue providing resources for partners who want to work with the program. With the perennial garden landscape permit, we developed this because we were getting questions from cities early on about ways that they can work with residents. Some of them weren't as interested in changing their ordinances, and so we created this as an option that could be used for cities who want to work with individual residents. And it's a 2-page document where residents fill out information about their project, they do a site plan, provide some additional information about their site. And I don't know that there's a lot of cities using this. It seems like more cities have been changing their ordinances, but this is one option for cities to incorporate pollinator habitat. And we have our list of sample landscape ordinances, which is a document we'll continue updating as we get more information about good examples that are being created around the state. This does have examples from several different cities that we thought were good examples of ordinances that allow for native plantings and perennial gardens. It's just been a tricky topic for a lot of cities because it's not a simple thing to go in and just change ordinances. There's a lot of considerations around this. And so it is helpful, I think, to have resources like this where there's some examples of work that's been done with cities where things have been working out pretty well for allowing pollinator habitat. Well, I think we have time for questions a little bit later. So that's the end of my presentation, and hopefully we can address any questions that you have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. I was trying to post some links that you mentioned in the chat, but we'll also share those with everyone later this week so that you can have access to those. And we do, continue to post any questions in the chat or raise your hand. But right now it looks like we don't have any, so we'll move on to Dr. Elaine Evans with the Minnesota Bee Lab. We're excited to have you talk a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes with research. Dan, it looks like you're still sharing. Can you stop presenting?
All right, it's saying only meeting organizers and presenters can share.
Okay, let me see if I can. Oh yeah, we lost you. Okay, hold on. Okay, you should be able to now.
Okay. Oops, need to go back to the beginning. All right. Good. Okay, good. So I actually mostly am talking about education stuff that we have as part of our outreach, but I can there's some research connected to it too, and I'm happy to answer more about that. I wanted to share a resource that we have to help increase the amount of pollinator education happening out there. So people have probably noticed there's a lot of public interest in pollinators. A lot of times there is more interest than there's ability to provide education to people. So we've created these pollinator education toolkits as a way to help people who want to talk to other people about pollinators. So awareness is one of the key things to really leading to action to help pollinators. So these toolkits have both physical and digital pieces. And the idea is we're covering a few different topics that are kind of the common questions that we get. So, or things that just people it may help for people to know more about. So we have an activity that's on how pollinators affect what's on our plates. We have another one that's about kind of common myths and realities for pollinators, as well as covering pollinator diversity. We have a couple interactive games. One is learning how population pressures affect monarch populations, and a game to create a garden and try to become a pollinator superhero.
Yes. Sorry.
Sounds like we have somebody unmuted.
Yes, it's just fine, Patty. That's about the only way you can get a hold of me when I'm.
All right.
All right. We also have an activity about, or a presentation about 4 actions to take to help pollinators, as well as some resources to host a pollinator trivia night, which we have kind of 2 levels. We have kind of an entry level, and we have a more advanced level if you have groups that are interested, and a lot of other things. As part of this, we've tried to make sure that we've tried to create these things to really stand on their own with just a little bit of information, but we also have a lot of background information for people who are interested in getting these kits and presenting to the public. We have videos that provide a bunch of background information so that you can feel more comfortable presenting them. So currently, we were able, with support from the Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund, we were able to get some physical kits out to 200 people across Minnesota. We also have some of these physical kits at Extension Outreach Centers, and we're just in the process of getting them into interlibrary loans. So hopefully anyone across the state will be able to have access to the physical kits. We also have these online components, which also include some pieces that are available in Spanish, which is great to be able to expand to more audiences. And those online resources are available if you just fill out a little form at this z-link, z.umn.edu/pollinator ambassador. One of the big questions we get is, how are pollinators doing? So we have some information there looking at the different bees, explaining that we don't know for most bees and other pollinators. We're still getting information. There's a few that we do know about. Bumblebees, what we know isn't good, with 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 bumblebee species being in decline in North America. Honeybee is not in decline in terms of their population, but they do have health problems, and beekeepers can raise more bees to replace them, but the health problems are serious, resulting in colony deaths. And with monarchs is the other one where we really know how they're doing, and it's not looking good. We have some information about the causes of decline with these combination with habitat loss, pesticides, pathogens, parasites, as well as climate change. And then the one that we really try to talk about is the 4 actions to help pollinators. So really providing things that people can do. And one of those that people often hear about is planting flowers, and there's great programs like the Lawns to Legumes that is helping a lot of people do that. Another one people may not talk about so much is providing homes for pollinators. So we do have some information about just how to do that for these different groups of pollinators. Including caterpillars that we're calling their homes, their kind of larval forage plants, but being able to provide homes for these ground nesting bees, cavity nesting bees, and bumblebees. A tool that we have that that people can use is this habitat assessment guide that we created as part of this project in partnership with the Xerces Society. And this is a habitat assessment guide for pollinators in yards, gardens, and parks. And this is available as a PDF. And with this, you can go through and grade your garden, your plans you have in parks to do restoration. You can do this kind of before and after. So you can go through and get graded on all of these different things that can help pollinators. And as part of that, hopefully you're seeing areas that you can improve. So if you're getting a low score in an area, then you can do that assessment and hopefully improve that and go back later to show the improvement that you've done. We also talk about climate change having an impact on pollinators and the importance of taking pollinator action to reduce greenhouse gases, use clean energy, and also planting. So not only those flowers, but also grasslands can have these deep root systems. Sustainable agriculture is something that can help. And we also connect to collecting data. So there are a few different ways that people can collect data and help with us learning more about pollinators. We talked about that big gap in knowing how most pollinators are doing. There is the monarch larva monitoring project, which has been going on a long time, looking at counting monarch eggs and caterpillars on milkweed plants, in addition to programs like Bumblebee Watch, which is looking at bumblebees across North America, and iNaturalist, which is a pretty general platform available as either an app or a website where people can, that's really documenting kind of any living thing. But this is a great tool for people who want to know more about what pollinators they have in their area. So you can go out and take photos of animals visiting flowers, share them on iNaturalist, and there are people that go in and help you identify, and so you can learn a lot about what you have going on there. There's a lot of benefits to getting people out collecting data. So this is something that it does increase the amount of data that we have. It's been something that's been really helpful with the rusty patch bumblebee. A lot of the records that we have of where they are from general public volunteers going out and taking photos and sharing them either on Bumblebee Watch or iNaturalist or through public participation science programs. These data also are important for informing policy and decision making, and they also just help people create those long-lasting connections to nature, hopefully leading to more conservation action. So I mentioned iNaturalist. This is a global tool that people have for learning more about the nature that's around them. So that is something that we encourage people to use. Bumblebee Watch is just for bumblebees, but it is a little bit different in that there are experts going in and identifying, as opposed to iNaturalist, which depending on who's in there, it is kind of a public system, which is great, but doesn't always end up in the most reliable identifications. There's a new program that we're just launching this year, which is the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas. So earlier the Minnesota Bee Atlas was mentioned, which this name is unfortunately a little bit confusing with that. But the Minnesota Bee Atlas, we're currently waiting on some funding issues to see if we can continue with our stage 2 of the Minnesota Bee Atlas. In the meantime, we have this program. The Minnesota Bee Atlas worked on both cavity nesting bees and bumblebees. But we're continuing with just the bumblebee section with the Minnesota Bee Atlas, which is a partnership with the Xerces Society and is something where people can adopt grids across the state. We have online training available for that this year. In the future, we'll probably be doing in-person workshops. But if people are really excited about doing more, that's a way that people can contribute. I wanted to just touch base on taking photos to share, because I'm talking about these public participation ways that people can share data relying on sharing photos. So it does help to have photos that can be reliably used for identification. And to do that, it really needs to be a few different angles. So you need to try to get a photo of kind of the top of the bee. So I'm focusing on bees here because that's what I know most about identification for. But in general, for any kind of pollinator that you're sharing, it'll help to have multiple angles. The bees, we also need a picture of the front of the face and also of the side. Sometimes it can help to take a video because things are moving quickly and you can get stills from the video. There is a specific event called the Backyard Bumblebee Count, which is happening from July 23rd to August 1st. And this is using iNaturalist, but focusing on bumblebees. And this is like our Christmas bird count version for bees. So trying to get as many people as we can out there. And the timing of this is focused on when rusty patch bumblebee populations are usually at their peak. So the hope is that we'll get more information, particularly about the rusty patch bumblebee, but we're gathering information on all bumblebees because honestly, we don't know which bumblebee species is going to be the next to decline. And it's really important for us to have information on them now. So we do have more information about this and a lot of other information about pollinators at our Bee Lab website at blab.umn.edu if people want to explore more there.
Thank you so much for sharing those resources. I don't see any questions. Are there any questions for Rebecca, Dan, or Elaine from our audience? You can use the hand raise or chat to add something in here. I have one. I don't know who can answer it, but I've recently been hearing more about no mow May, which sounds great to me because that means less chores. But leaving your lawn to continue to grow and letting those, dandelions and other clover or other plants to prosper in the month of May in support of our pollinators. Is there any science behind that, or is it just a bunch of lazy people who don't want to mow?
There is one study that I'm aware of that did examine pollinator diversity in kind of mown and unmown lawns. And, they did find more, a greater abundance and a greater diversity of bees in, lawns that were not mown, which is kind of, like if there's flowers there, you're more likely to find bees there than if they're not flowers there. I think some of the I know there is concern just about kind of levels of things. So that's like one step, but is it as good as providing as like actually planting a garden with native plants with blooming things? There's some dandelions. There's some studies where it's not the best pollen source. I think it's a good nectar source, but the pollen is actually missing a bunch of nutrients. So, so in a study done with bumblebees, they ended up eating their own eggs to get back their nutrients because it just, when they were fed only dandelion pollen. So, you know, it's important to have, it can be part of what's happening, but it's certainly not enough if it's just that.
I'm curious if any of our city folks have been hearing about this from residents. I know there's a lot of nuisance ordinances that would probably prevent people right now from letting their lawn grow an entire month. I know here we are May 19th and we've mowed twice this month, and I try to let it grow, but I want to be a good neighbor too. Is anyone hearing that from residents in your communities?
This is Deb from South St. Paul. We've been seeing some updates. We are not doing it in South St. Paul, but West St. Paul is doing it. And there are updates saying, you know what, I made it this far, but now I have to hire an industrial lawnmower to come in and cut my grass. I can't do it myself. So, yeah, our code enforcement person said, absolutely not. So that's where she was with it this year.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
I think some of it, you know, people are looking for simple things they can do, and I think there's other simple things that can be better. You know, so I'm really into the messy corners of yards kind of thing. So, you know, if you have areas where you can, you know, like leave a pile of sticks, you know, leave a log, have, you know, piles of leaves that you just leave in some corners that are out of the way. I think that has potential to help with that nesting habitat, which is a big piece too.
We have been seeing a lot of interest in alternative lawns as well, which has been great. And that's generally been our approach, that we've been promoting an intentional alternative lawn, you know, one that is planned with certain species, and there's both non-native versions with fescues and clovers. We've also been working on some native seed mixes that could be pollinator lawns that would be low growing. They're kind of in an experimental stage at this point. That's been part of our approach. It's just making sure that people are thinking about this, that it's well planned, that the aesthetics is thought about with these plantings. Ultimately, we want all this to be accepted and be part of a movement, and so it needs to be something that fits within neighborhoods as far as these different plantings that are being done.
Yeah, I just want to say from our pollinator survey, you know, we asked a question about what is one of the main challenges that you're facing when you're trying to do some pollinator friendly actions, take some pollinator friendly actions, and some people, you know, mentioned that they wanted to install pollinator habitat, but sometimes regulations or, you know, neighborhood regulations or city ordinances were not very flexible for them to be able to do so. So, you know, I think that what Dan is saying is very important as we think about moving forward with this, trying to find alternatives that are acceptable within you know what people find aesthetically pleasing, right?
Yeah, thank you. Beth, I see your question in here. Do you want to unmute yourself and share?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So my question is, if I plant a bee-friendly lawn, my house it's on a U-shaped street, so I have 3 neighbors, one on each side, and then the street in front. How likely is it that that mix would migrate into their yards, because they all treat their yards with herbicides or whatever? Again, on the good neighbor theme, I guess. What's a good neighbor?
Well, my thought is that it wouldn't spread if it's fescues and clovers that are being used with the planting. I don't think we see those spread very often. It's possible that the clovers might creep a little bit, but if they are spraying their lawns for weeds, it's going to kill off anything that would potentially spread over to that other lawn. And so we haven't really been too concerned about that with pollinator lawns, about them moving. We really don't see the fescues moving within these landscapes, even though they're a non-native species. We don't see them as a risk to surrounding lawns or ecosystems either, because of how those plants behave. They just don't seem to spread.
Megan has a good question. Can pets disrupt a pollinator-friendly yard, or are there any other considerations we should think about with our furry friends?
So I know in my yard I've had multiple dogs in my pollinator yard over a couple decades, and they do find I have a couple areas that I do keep short. I've just kind of taken a long-term approach and let stuff kind of take over from the grass that dies and native plants that come in and take over. But I do have a lot of kind of low-growing native plants that I have in enough area of my yard that my dogs can run around there. And really the only problem I've had is I haven't been able to grow sweetgrass because my dogs just eat it down to the ground. And that is a consideration, just to make sure, that there are some plants that you need to be careful about in terms of their possible toxicity to pets. Which that one is fine for them to eat, a little bit too fine, I guess. I haven't been able to keep it going, but that's the only real consideration that I would be concerned about is just making sure that that everything you have in your yard is safe for your pets.
I think it's helpful to note too that there's a lot of trees and shrubs that are really beneficial for pollinators, especially this time of year. There's a lot of flowering shrubs, and if you have a lot of activity with dogs or kids or whatever, the trees and shrubs are a good option because they're more durable.
Great. Okay, well, if anyone has any other questions, continue to share those in the chat. But we'll go ahead and move on to our two city presenters here. So we'll hear from South St. Paul and the city of Bemidji about things that are going on in their own communities. And so we'll start with you, Deb.
Actually, we're going to start with Monika.
Monika.
She's got the first part of the presentation, if you can get it up.
I don't have presenter access, Deb. I think you do, so if you want to pull the...
I can add you, Monika. This is so weird. I keep... It looks like you do.
Okay.
You want to try? Or...
Let's see. I don't have a thing that pops up for it, but Deb, do you want to maybe pull it up and I can just kind of talk through it?
Oh, you know what? I don't even have it up. Sorry.
All right.
I can pull it up too.
Great. Yeah, it just doesn't give me an option to share my content, unfortunately. Oh, I lied. I can pull it up, I think. All right. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Great. All right. So for those who I haven't met before, my name is Monika Mann with the city of South St. Paul.
You just might want to go into your presenter mode. I can see it, but.
I unfortunately don't know how to do that.
Oh, we'll see it anyway. We can just see the next slides on the side.
Oh, okay. Let's try it. All right. That better?
There you go.
Great. All right. Thanks all for bearing with me. Again, I'm Monika Mann from the city of South St. Paul, presenting on South St. Paul's efforts to be a pollinator-friendly city. So back in 2015, we had some residents from the nature of South St. Paul attend one of our Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee meetings. And they were presenting about their concerns about the declining health of pollinators and asked for city help in addressing these concerns. The residents really wanted city council commitment for improving the health of pollinators and the preservation of their habitat. So staff, in partnership with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, drafted a resolution in support of pollinators. Staff, including Deb Griffith, who's here today, and then Pat Dunn, who's here today, were also involved in the process. The resolution that was passed unanimously is in support of pollinators and their habitat. Mainly the city is doing its best effort to refrain from using neonicotide pesticides in city spaces. It's doing its best effort to plant flowers that are favorable to bees and other pollinators in city parks and spaces, and then using bee or butterfly friendly fertilizers. To follow up that, in 2016, the city held a What's All the Buzz community education event. Basically invited residents to come in and kind of explain the city's commitments to pollinators and pollinator habitat, and explaining their options as well. So that same year, the city received an award from the Pollinator Friendly Alliance, recognizing the city for its efforts towards passionate local leaders. And then Deb, I think this is over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to take it here. And, you know, that's one thing that we have found, that you need the passionate local leaders as well as the residents to, oh, what happened to the PowerPoint, Monika?
Oh, I can hold it back up, sorry.
Thank you. Not to say that you guys aren't beautiful there, but I'm just telling you, we got some good photos here, so. But passionate leaders as well as, you know, at all levels. And one of our, you know, who is B everything here in town is State Representative Rick Hansen. He is a local resident here in South St. Paul, and he is such a supporter of bee and pollinator friendly and stuff. So we have it at the state level. We also have it at the local level as well, too, with the city council and residents as well.
Monika, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Deb. If you stop sharing.
I am trying to figure out how to do
Yeah, press the little box with the X in the middle and that little pop-up.
That one?
Yep, now you should be able to restart and hopefully find the PowerPoint.
There
I get
you
confused
go.
every time. Yep. Okay.
Sorry, it's the first time I've used Teams like this.
We have also been back in the building. We hardly ever left, too. So we've been meeting in person here, you know, safely. But yeah, this is new to us. But there's Senator Rick Hansen. And if you take a look real close at his mask there, too, it's the beehive. And so he is very passionate about it. We also have local groups, the Nature of South St. Paul. And so with a combined effort with the state and the local and the grassroots groups, it's important, and we work together in order to continue to move forward pollinator friendly. So we also have, should I go beep? There we go. We have a lot of programming that we do in town with the use of volunteers. We promote pollinator-friendly environment. We have a butterfly garden at the Grandview Park as well as the Lashy Park. We did a butterfly release with it, which is wonderful, and it was a Girl Scout troop that did this. We have a lot of native plant resources on the city's website, and we are so excited that we were one of the recipients of the Pollinator Outreach Toolkit. We are working with the South St. Paul City Library, and we are going to be doing events this summer with the Pollinator Outreach events. And so we're really excited. We got the kit, we were able to go through it, and now we're doing some programming with it. So yeah, we're involving the city library as well, and to reach out to everyone. We also have a couple programs that we have done. The one of them is the Streets in Bloom program, where we have planter boxes on 2 of our main streets in town. And we invite the community to help us plant each year, to help us come up with ideas on what kind of pollinator-friendly plants do we want to plant in them. We work with the local nurseries here in town to make sure that we've got good plants. And we want all ages to be able to participate in this. So these are just a few of the small groups that come out and help us plant each year. We'll be doing this in May, and then, you know, the maintenance throughout. Then we have in town about 20 blooming park locations where these have been actually adopted by volunteers within the community. And we, you know, look at, say, what kind of plants can we get in? And most of them are perennial plants, but we also, you know, each year put in a mix of annual plants. And these are maintained and planted and planned by volunteers throughout the community. And it can be Boy Scout troop, Girl Scout troops, individual families. It can be groups of people, and they're there just to help beautify the community and the parks and just add that, that pollinator pop within the community of South St. Paul. And so, we're really happy to have these people. We also have a few master gardeners that will come out and help us, pick things or what we should do or how we should change things. So we go from the youth that have not that green thumb yet, but all the way up to the master gardeners to make the parks look nice here within the community of South St. Paul. So we're really excited. Our plants are beginning to come up. The volunteers are, in fact, I'm running out of park locations for volunteers, which is exciting to me that we have that much interest in the community to be able to get more butterfly and bee places in town here. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it back to Monika because she worked on the native planting ordinance.
Yeah, so last summer, the city decided to further its commitment to pollinator habit and pollinators by adopting a native plant ordinance. So the intention behind the ordinance was to encourage homeowners to plant natives in their yards without concerns of violating the nuisance ordinance. Most cities have nuisance ordinances, which when plantings get over a certain height, usually like 6 to 8 inches, they're considered a nuisance. And owners are required to cut them down. Often you get code enforcement complaints, usually from your city. It's a letter saying, hey, your grass is too tall. So the city last year worked on an ordinance that would exempt all native plantings and all native grasses from that nuisance plant category. And we specifically spelled out, that they need to be managed by industry standard. There are certain setbacks to try and prevent ones that spread. We have a city council member who previously worked in landscaping, and natives were one of his big areas of passion. So we had his help throughout that, but we're really proud of the ordinance. We're really excited that we were able to find a way to exempt a lot of the native plants. That way we can have residents plant them without concerns of getting complaints from code enforcement or their neighbor. And if they do, they can say, hey, this is native, it's all right. And that concern kind of goes away. And that's kind of it for our presentation. Happy to take questions. Oops.
Yeah, somewhere there's a box with an X. There you go. Every platform is so different. I wish we
we're
could
too used to WebEx.
talk to each other and yeah. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Monika. A question from Teresa here on who coordinates your volunteers, or how do you? Sounds like you, Deb.
I do. Yeah, I started here as the volunteer coordinator with the city of South St. Paul and have morphed into community affairs and working with community groups. So we do have a formalized program here for volunteers, and they work directly with me. Yep.
Any tips for cities thinking about leveraging volunteers a little bit more?
They especially with COVID, they are excited to get out and do something. And so, like I said, this year we had some retirements with our Blooming Parks program. And so I just put out a Facebook post saying, hey, I got a few spots available. And I'm just, like I said, I'm getting overrun with volunteers saying, hey, we want to help. So, which is great to see. So we'll just be dividing up a few of them so we can get more help in the parks.
That's
and I'm
great.
sure Pat Dunn right now has got 2 thumbs up, right?
Of course.
Thank you.
Dan had a question about the ordinance. Is there a maximum size for the plantings?
So in the ordinance that we passed last year, we kept the standard for non-native plants at 6 inches for the height. That was just the previous standard that we had used, but there is no standard for native grasses and plants on their size or height. They're just completely exempted.
And from Danielle, how much refinement did the ordinance need? Were there common concerns you heard from residents?
So that's a great question. Basically, it was kind of a rewrite of our ordinance. Previously, our ordinance was just, this is the definition of a weed. This is how tall a weed is. We don't allow any grasses or anything over this height because that's a nuisance. So our rewrite basically, we have a whole section laid out specifically about natives, and we were asked by code enforcement to keep in the language about, nuisance grasses, ones that are over 6 inches. We did get some input, like I had mentioned earlier, from one of our city council members who has worked with pollinators. So he provided a lot of input as we were tweaking it to try and make sure the standards worked well for the community. We didn't hear a ton of concerns from residents. They were more just excited that there was going to be an ordinance. We put a little blip out about it in the city newsletter about the time and got a lot of encouragement about it. So
that's great. Well, seeing no more questions from our audience, I think we'll go ahead and move over to the city of Bemidji. Thank you, Deb and Monika. So we have Marcia Larson, Parks and Recreation Director with the city of Bemidji, and I think you're going to share your screen.
Yeah, sure. Hello.
Looks good.
There we go. Great. And everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So I'm Marcia Larson. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director for the city of Bemidji. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our Birds, Bees, Butterflies Bemidji, which is a really fun group. So basically this group kind of grew out of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Our sustainability office at Bemidji State University, we have a very active sustainability office, kind of approached our then mayor, Rita Albright, and said, we'd really like you to take the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. So they did. The mayor took the pledge to protect monarch butterflies in the fall of 2016. And for those of you who are familiar with that, that is something that is sponsored by the National Wildlife Federation and basically commits the city to complete certain actions. And you can pick your actions. There's certain action steps to increase those butterfly populations. So the city said, yes, we'll do that. And then looked to the Park and Rec Department and said, awesome, so how do you want to do this? And what action steps should we take? So I met, of course, with our sustainability coordinator because we do a lot of projects together. And at that time, we also had a Green Corps member who was focusing on forestry programming with us. So we got together and said, well, let's pull in our garden club and talk about this on what things we can do and what steps we can take. And we identified those action steps, which I've kind of listed here, but basically looking at some demonstration gardens, school gardens, campaigns to encouraging citizens to plant those pollinator gardens, do some giveaways, and of course a monarch festival. So kind of start out as a small group, kind of talking about it a little bit and how can we do this? And like I said, luckily I had a Green Corps member who was pretty enthusiastic about it. From there, it was really interesting is our local Audubon Society kind of came forward and started talking about becoming a bird city at the same time. And so then they wanted to sponsor that and came to the city and said, well, let's become a bird-friendly community. And here's what this is. We want to protect the habitat. We want to reduce threats to birds. We want to engage people. And how can we do that as well? And we don't want to, we don't want to have all these initiatives going at once, but how can we work together? And all of them kind of overlapped. And we started looking at the community as a whole and started bringing more people in. And everyone got really excited at the grassroots level to kind of take on something. So we kind of as Parks and Rec were like, okay, well, let's just bring all these people together. And it was really interesting because everyone just was super excited to meet and talk. And we also have such a great resource with Bemidji State University. This picture that we're looking at is actually Dr. Brian Hiller. We have purple martin houses in our parks, and then they're around the community, and he is the purple martin guy. So we already have some projects going on in our community is kind of why I put this picture here. So once we started talking about the monarch butterfly, native plantings, pollinators, birds, a all of a sudden, all these people in our community and organizations just got really excited about how can we plant more native plants and how can we start turning some of our gardens in front of buildings and libraries and everything else into how can we turn all of those into things that really have a great impact on our community. Sorry, so I just was wandering in my office. So we got all these people together. We got our Bogs and Logs, our master naturalists, our garden clubs, the nurseries, sustainability, our downtown alliance, the Audubon Society. We got all of these groups together and decided to kind of come up with a unified message. And tried to really focus on the grassroots efforts. And like I said, we looked at what are we doing and how can we incorporate native plants into things we're already doing. So we're not going to dig up the garden at the library necessarily, but are there areas that maybe need a little help that we can augment and add native plants in there? So that's what we did. We looked at 2 areas, and the garden club was super excited because they take care of our public library, and we added demonstration gardens there. We had 3 huge gardens in North Country Park, and we added pollinator gardens there, which I'll show you some pictures of later. That we had our Bogs and Logs, our master naturalists, our master gardeners. We got some funding through the Audubon, and then we had our kids from camp, our Kids in Motion, come out and plant all these gardens side by side with our master naturalists and our master gardeners. So we found all those common themes between Bird Cities and the Monarch Pledge, and then they worked together and kind of created the logo, and then promoted that native landscaping between everyone. So it was just a really cool kind of synergy we found. Kind of hate that word, but that's really what it was. Everyone got super excited. And we actually outgrew our conference room at one point because all these more people, everyone just kept inviting more people, and the group just kept getting bigger and bigger, and more things kept happening in the community over the years that we kept meeting. So some of the things that we really wanted to do too, so highlight native gardens around town that were already there. So we created the logo and tried to incorporate every part of birds, bees, and butterflies, so that it wasn't just focusing on the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, but we were pulling in everything. And then trying to get media attention for all the planting event and include everyone's project. So even if it wasn't something we funded as the Birds, Bees, Butterflies or the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, we still wanted to promote it, and we wanted to provide signage and education and encouragement. One of the other things we felt was really important to do was to kind of meet with the local nurseries and garden centers and say, how can we get you to provide native plantings and native plants and provide education to people so that they can also get those plants locally, easily. They're at the shops. Can we put up some different kind of educational materials and signage right in your nursery? We connected them with Prairie Restorations and some other places that they could provide and purchase the plants, so that our local nurseries would also have some profit off them and could provide the actual native plants, so that people wouldn't have to say order, or, you know, because people are going to do what's relatively easy unless they're really dedicated. And there are a lot of really dedicated people. We know they're going to plant pollinator gardens, but are people that are just learning, are they really going to drive to Morris or, you know, wherever to, you know, that's a distance. So we tried to really do that and do speakers and have events right at the nurseries. And this is actually, this bottom picture here that's one of my staff people. And this is all of our kids. I think my daughter may be in this picture. But this was at our North Country Park, where we had all of our kids from camp. It was kind of hot that day, but they all came out and planted I think we planted almost 6,000 plants. And I should find a picture now to show you, because this was probably, oh, she's really little in that picture. So this was kind of a few years ago. And it's just gorgeous. I was out there last year and we really promoted it, and we had a lot of people going to the park just to look at our native pollinator gardens. And somebody, I overheard them, they didn't know who I was because I was just wandering around. And they're like, wow, this is like this Central Park of Bemidji. And I just laughed because I'm like, really? But it was very cool to see that they went specifically to that park to look at these garden beds that were pollinator gardens. And currently we're enhancing that area and putting a natural playground in too. But people went specifically just to see pollinator gardens, which I think is awesome. That's coming a long way from people complaining about unsightly areas to embracing how awesome it is. The other thing that we really focused on was trying to make it really easy for the community and for people who want to put in pollinator gardens. And we have such great people in our community between our master naturalists and our master gardeners, and Erica Bailey Johnson at our sustainability office. And we just have really great people in our community and on our committee that they put together a top 10 list every year just to make it easy. So here's top 10 plants. And so you can get a hold of this flyer that we put out every year and be like, okay, here's at least 10 plants that I am familiar with. And on the back is kind of an explanation and where you should plant them and how you should plant them. We added the Ojibwe name because that's important in our community. And then at least you have something, well, okay, these are 10 plants I know about. And we usually do big signs and put those at the nursery at Wells as well. So kind of an easy, quick way that you could just add these couple plants maybe to your existing gardens. So you don't have to rip everything out and try to figure out how to redo everything, because that can be overwhelming for people who are just learning. So that was one thing we really focused on. So each year, put those back out, and that has been really successful. So here's like a couple of other things that we've done. We really focused on how to get started with it. And we've done those. It's also a way to get things planted, quite frankly. So some of our demonstration gardens, we did some, I have some photos of that one too, of our history center. We, as a Park and Rec department, maintained that, and it was kind of looking like it needed a facelift. They mentioned they might be interested in having some pollinator gardens out front. So we pretty much ripped out everything that was there. Our master naturalist, our master gardener worked together and designed it for us. And then we hosted a workshop, a hands-on workshop. So we purchased all the plants and then had people sign up for the workshop and then taught them about the plants. And then they actually planted our demonstration garden for us. And we also had basically a tween camp. So we brought the tweens out there, which they hate being called that, by the way, and had them plant side by side with anyone who also signed up for the workshop. So we had our master naturalists, our master gardener, other adults that signed up for the camp, and then our pre-teenager, whatever, that fun age group of like middle schoolers kind of out there also, which was cool. And they were super excited to do it. And then we had a write-up in the Audubon magazine for that. So the parents of the kids were also super excited because then they were also got their pictures in the paper and everywhere else. So we did that with a downtown planner because we were encouraging, we have a bunch of planners in our downtown area that are adopted by our community. So we did a similar workshop with our sustainability office. We did one in a front yard of a rental house on how you could do it in your front yard. We purchased banners, which I have sitting here. I can flip it up at some point, so that we put those in the parks and in strategic locations that just show, hey, we do pollinator plants, and they're educational. And again, like I said, we kind of focus on Ojibwe, so we make sure we put those on all of our flyers. And then we also did the Lawns to Legumes workshop, kind of featured those in our, I think we heard about those a little earlier. We've done some of those in our community as well, partnering. And then of course, here's just a list of some of our demonstration gardens that we've done. We've done some really big ones and some small ones at schools. These two were out of the newspaper from our history center. So you can see there's some of the kids kind of in there along with the adults. So that was a really fun project. We also do our community celebrations. Our Monarch Butterfly Festival has just gotten really big. The first year it was kind of inside at BSU, and there was 30 or so people there. The one picture is our outdoor, it's basically an outdoor classroom or amphitheater type area. We have speakers, we get local personalities, butterfly experts, and this is our mayor next to our master naturalist who likes to dress up as a bee costumes in my office. I guess I could have put it on for you. And then our Bird City celebration. It is now a bald eagle festival. So we have a local group, Nature Connection, that's really taken that on the last couple of years. So that's really cool. So we have two really pretty big size festivals now associated with the birds, bees, butterflies as well. So, and our mayor has been, she's not the mayor anymore. She has retired as mayor, but had always been super supportive of all of our initiatives. And I think that has made a huge difference as well. One of the things too that we kind of learned from our nurseries and garden centers, this was all very new for them. And they all kind of started at a different point, but we felt this was really important to try to, if we want people to plant pollinator gardens, to really try to make sure they can get the correct plants and just be open and communicate with them and just try to understand where they're coming from, and then just take those small steps. So, and that's what we tried to do. And really the coolest thing about all of this was just the level of engagement with our community. It really is at the grassroots level. This is one of my favorite groups that I get to work with because they're super enthusiastic, and when we don't meet for a while, you know, they're just like, hey, what are we doing? COVID has definitely slowed us down a bit, but there's still lots of projects out in the community. And yeah, they bring the lavender cookies to our meetings and check in and send me all sorts of articles. And we have our master gardeners who writes articles for the papers. And they do so much that I'd be talking all day if I told you all the cool stuff that they actually do. So, but I will stop talking and figure out how to stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really like how you connected to the Mayor's Monarch Pledge in Bird City, Minnesota. Kind of pledges started this whole movement towards community engagement and education.
Yeah, it really did, and the momentum was amazing. And what was kind of funny to me, as I do say this, is I had no idea that they were going to do the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, and communication isn't always the greatest. And so the city clerk's like, oh, I signed you up for this, because they took the pledge and then she signed my name to it. You know, and then they're like, oh, you're gonna do this, and I'm like, what? But it was so fun, and it was like, I'm like, oh, it's great, we'll make it work. And with the Green Corps member, we just ran with it, and everyone, like locally, like the groups just jumped on board, and it's amazing. I mean, like I said, they're just such a fun group. And we've just done some really cool things, and like the banners, I just really have to give a huge shout out to my group because we have like these huge banners just under downtown. I picked the Columbine because it's my favorite, but they just keep doing things, and it's almost like they're just dragging me along sometimes because you get so busy, but let's do this, and the momentum just goes. And that last photo I showed was, we call it the Lakeview Oasis. We had a liquor store they remodeled, and they're like, well, we're just going to make this blacktop pavement. And I'm like, no, don't do that. We want that to be a green space. And they're like, fine, if you want a green space, you figure it out and build it. I'm like, oh, well, that's not quite what I meant. But I said, well, let's make it native plantings, and everyone jumped on board and helped plant it. A lot of my staff are out there, but we helped design it, plant it. I mean, everyone was on board, and now it is a little oasis out there with native plants and the new signage. And it's just really cool that when you have an idea, we have so many source of volunteers in a committee that just jumps on board and throws out all their ideas and thoughts.
Are there any questions from the audience? I don't see any in the chat, but you can feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, add something in the chat for any of our presenters. Teresa asks, how do you fund the plantings? It's a great question.
That is a great question. So it's a combination. So the Audubon actually has a lot of funding for and the signage. So the Audubon did provide a lot of grant funding each year through the Audubon as one of our partners. They did provide some funding. I pulled some money out of my budget for some of our projects, and then Soil and Water Conservation actually funded one of our larger projects at our Watermark Arts Center. And I kind of went through it quickly, but there is at the Headwaters Audubon Society, if you go to their website, there's a birds, bees, butterflies, there's the keeper of our information. So there's actually a map that shows where all of our plantings are. And a lot of them are the Soil and Water Conservation, Audubon funded, and then city funded. BSU also has a lot of plantings on campus, and they tend to have funding as well. So we just leverage as much money as a group as we can, and that's kind of the beauty of working together.
Jill, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Yeah, so Elaine mentioned some of the things that need to happen in order to protect the bees. So you don't want to rake up all your leaves. You want to leave some areas for nesting. I know I've done that in my yard, but it doesn't look real clean. I mean, what's good for the pollinators sometimes isn't aesthetically pleasing. Is that an issue, or isn't that a concern in what you all are incorporating into your gardens and projects?
I think that was for you, Marcia.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Or Deb, but yeah, just general maintenance
is always an issue. But one of my friends always kind of said beauty is kind of who defines beauty. So I think you have to define your own. I know what people like to throw out their weeds and what is beauty and what is defined as how it looks. And I think you have to define how you think something looks. Because traditionally people would say, the long grass or pretty flowers, what we traditionally say is beautiful. I think the native plantings and the longer grasses and knowing that that's a habitat for something is amazing. So you kind of just have to balance it. And I would say what we have also noticed is we have planted so many more shoreland buffers, and we don't mow areas near as much as we used to. When I first started, we mowed all the way to the lake edge. I don't even know how they didn't drop the mowers in the lake. And we stopped doing all of that. And the complaints have been minimal. So I think you just have to balance it, especially in public spaces, and that signage, that education, that enthusiasm goes a long way. That's just my thoughts. I don't know if other people have similar, but just, and education's huge. Why are you doing that? Well,
Thank you.
Is overall maintenance a concern for either city, Bemidji or South St. Paul? You know, you're adding in gardens that take a little bit more work than you know, a quick lawn mow. And so how do you get city staff on board with that ask, and maybe it's volunteers?
that's a great question. Maintenance is huge, but you got to look at short term, long term. So for us, the initial maintenance of putting in a pollinator or native planting and native landscaping is high, you know, and it does take diligence the first couple of years. So like when we do pollinator areas, like I'm talking larger areas, acres or buffers, you just have to be aware of that. But the longer term is less, and you reap those benefits. And then you realize also that, you know, yeah, you can keep mowing to the lake, but you're going to continue to do that and you're losing habitat, you're causing erosion, and there's all these other impacts that aren't great. And my staff is all on board with being environmentally friendly, with habitat, with, you know, they get really excited about it. So I don't have staff that finds that a negative. They all find that a positive. And that again is education and pulling them on board right away. They all were there when we were doing these plantings. The one picture at the end, that was a lot of my staff. And, you know, they wanted to be there. They were excited to be there. And then I have some working and cleaning up some of our pollinator downtown planters, and they're excited about it. So you just kind of have to realize that nothing is maintenance free, and mowing constantly every single week or multiple times is not maintenance free either. So you just accept what type of maintenance you want to do and the impacts. And I assume South St. Paul probably would be similar, but
yep, this is Deb. I would say that we are similar. You still have to, you know, maintain the flower beds so that they look nice. And so, you know, getting the winter kill off or whatever, we still have volunteers that will be out there maintaining these areas. And, you know, Pat, I think you're still on board too. And so through Public Works too, you know, the continual mowing, but respectful of the spots that are planted.
Yep, that's correct.
Any other questions? Or are there any other examples out there of things that we didn't cover today that maybe you're really proud of that are happening in your community that you want to share? So while you think about that, I see Rebecca's hand is up. So
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, I was wondering about how you guys have dealt with complaints, or, you know, because, for example, the city of St. Paul has, you know, amended their ordinances to, you know, to make sure that people don't get, you know, sued or something over nuisance complaints, something like that. And I'm wondering if Bemidji has done something similar, or how you guys have also, you know, deal with complaints or with people not wanting their neighborhood to have pollinator plants that may look like they have a little jungle. I don't know. Yeah.
that's a great question. So we had changed our ordinance quite a few years ago, allowing for that. And last year, maybe, or the year before, we added a kind of a landscape permit so that people could actually plant native plants in the right of way. And we haven't really promoted it a lot. And I could foresee that being an issue at some point. It's a cool idea, but to your point, yeah, it becomes challenging. And the city owns kind kind of a huge buffer area along the lake. And we have the Sanford Center, it's a convention center. But we own all the shoreline all the way along that, and there's a hotel right next to it. And we are in constant conflict, I would say, because they insist we trim all those weeds down. And it's right next to an AMA aquatic management area. So there's an aquatic management area, which if you're familiar with those, it's pretty wild. They don't touch anything. Then it's ours. And then it's more, it's going to be more, it's in progress of a buffer. So it's not real grown up yet. And I have had prairie restorations come in and talk to them. I've talked to them. We talk in the summer, probably 4 or 5 times. So it's constant education and constant discussion with that one group. So, and there's some other areas that aren't done as well. So it's constant conversation, and we do get complaints. And we do our best to work through them. And I do my best to maintain, I am not cutting that down. Because we have some other buffer areas that people don't own, but they own the houses. And it tends to be those areas right around the lake that we get the biggest complaints, because they want a view of the lake and I'm blocking their view. And I'm like, you can still see the lake and you don't own that property. And I'm trying to protect, we have all the good reasons and trying to explain that, but it is really challenging. And then we have someone who has a great pollinator garden. And it's on private property, it's their property, but we get complaints about it quite a bit. And we thank them for their input and leave it at that, really, because they're well within their rights. But yeah, it's just education as much as possible. But I don't know if anyone else has a better way to do it, but you're never going to get 100% of the people. Interestingly, we inadvertently, it was the street department, wasn't the parks department, mowed down some of the native plantings one year. He was supposed to mow this one area and he got a little crazy because he thought, oh, I should just mow that. I don't know what he was thinking. Rogue mower. And so there was like a letter to the editor of how dare we mow down the native plantings, and it got ugly. And I was trying to defend our actions, which was really hard to do because we were in the wrong, and mistakes happen, but it was the reverse. So that was kind of an interesting educational piece too. So sometimes it works opposite. But you have to take all those opportunities to educate, but it's tough.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. That's very, very interesting. And yeah, I just wonder how different cities deal with those types of situations, because as you say, not everybody is going to be 100% on board all the time. So yeah, really encouraged by everything you've said, though.
Shelley, I see your question here. Would you like to unmute yourself and share?
Yes, thank you. I'm in Moorhead, and just last city council meeting, we got this parks to stop spraying for weeds. They use T-zone, and so I got a lot of support for that. And we also have a contract with Cass County Vector Control for spraying permethrin. They have, last year there was a mass killing of monarchs. And so that's on the Fargo, North Dakota side, and we're on the Moorhead, Minnesota side. And we have, a lot of people wanting us to keep doing the spraying, but then there was a lot of pushback since that killing last year. And so we did finally get to the point where we gave a down payment in case we need to spray for mosquitoes. But I'm just wondering, and that is if there is a potential for some West Nile outbreak. But we still, a lot of us would rather not spray at all and just do the larval control. And also along the river, we're on the Red River, in case there is kind of like poison ivy or some kind of invasive plant, how do you handle that in your different parks, and your if you do any kind of mosquito control? I guess that's that for like Marcia and Deb and Monika. Thanks.
Okay. I was giving South St. Paul an opportunity to respond. We actually don't do any mosquito control in our community. We just don't do that. Maybe it's because we're surrounded by lakes and there's no point in it. So that's one thing we don't do. And I know we as the Parks Department do spraying, but we have always been very cautious about things that we put. One, we are right next to the lake, so we are extremely cautious and do a lot of research on anything we might spray in our gardens, so to speak. We do a lot of hand pulling, and we're just really cautious. We read labels. We have been researching and following everything to just make sure we're not being counterproductive to our native plantings. So I think that's something we have been weary, or we have not put like, so with the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, that can be one of your action steps, is to actually take the pledge not to spray things, take those actions. We just haven't done that. We haven't taken that step. We internally just are monitoring ourselves, if that makes sense. We just haven't publicly said what we are doing, but we minimize everything. And we're just cautious about it. Like I said, it doesn't make sense for us to say we're not going to mow. We mow less, we watch what we're doing, and then spray the heck out of everything. And I'm just not a fan of mosquito spraying, so we just don't do any of that.
This is Pat with the City of South St. Paul. We do not do any mosquito control, although the Metropolitan Mosquito Control does do some areas in the city itself, which we don't have a lot of control over. But as far as the city is concerned, we do not do any.
And I'm going to add that Pat is our Public Works Director, and so he's the person that would know. So thanks for jumping in there, Pat.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shelley, I saw that Gabrielle had posted this on our Green Step Cities email listserv, and it didn't look like, at least that I saw, much response about that question. But if there's anything we can do to help reach out and help you guys figure out, what's the best path moving forward, or what other cities are doing, happy to connect with you on that. So looks like we're about at time. A couple things to wrap up here. Again, I'll share this out in an email later this week, but just connecting back to some Green Step Cities best practice actions. Pulled out those that have some kind of relation to pollinators, whether it's habitat, mostly habitat, ordinances, and other policies that cities might want to take a look at. So as you can see, there's quite a number of them on our website. And there's also a link to all of these under one link, so that'll be shared. And then finally, just to wrap up, we take the summer months off for these monthly workshops. So it feels like officially summer now. But we will be at the League of Minnesota Cities annual conference. So hope to see many of you or your other colleagues there, June 22nd to 25th. And on the 25th, from 10:15 to 11:15, we have a Green Step education session on cost saving opportunities for cities, looking at the economics of implementing sustainability actions in your community. And we'll hear from the cities of La Crescent and Bemidji about what those cost savings are that they've seen through some various projects. So with that, thank you to all of our presenters today for sharing with us, and thank you for everyone else for attending. You'll see email with the recording, the slides, contact information, resource links, all that good stuff to you, hopefully by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or anyone else. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.